Bommai v. Union of India. The case of S. Bommai v. Union of India, 1994, is a landmark judgment of the Supreme Court of India. This case mainly deals with the misuse of Article 356 of the Constitution of India, which provides for state emergency or President's rule. The judgment is very important for understanding federalism, democracy, and constitutional governance in India. Background of the case. Bommai was the Chief Minister of Karnataka in 1989. His government belonged to the Janata Dal party. Due to political defections, the Governor of Karnataka reported to the President of India that the Bommai government had lost the majority in the Legislative Assembly. Without conducting a floor test in the Assembly, the President dismissed the state government and imposed President's rule under Article 356 of the Constitution of India. Similar dismissals of elected state governments under Article 356 had taken place in several other states around the same time. These actions were widely criticized as being politically motivated and an abuse of constitutional power by the central government. Bommai and others challenged the dismissal before the Supreme Court of India, arguing that Article 356 was being misused and that the President's satisfaction should not be absolute. Because the case involved important questions relating to federalism, democracy, and misuse of emergency powers, it was heard by a 9-judge bench of the Supreme Court. This background led to one of the most important constitutional judgments in Indian history. Issues before the court. In S. Bommai v. Union of India, 1994, the Supreme Court of India examined several important constitutional questions related to Article 356 of the Constitution of India. The main issues before the court were as follows. Whether the President's satisfaction under Article 356 is absolute or subject to judicial review. The court had to decide whether courts can examine the validity of the President's proclamation imposing President's rule. Whether a state government can be dismissed without proving loss of majority on the floor of the Legislative Assembly. The issue was whether the Governor's report alone is sufficient or whether a floor test is mandatory. Whether the Governor's report is final and beyond judicial scrutiny. The court examined whether the Governor's recommendation can be questioned in court. Whether misuse of Article 356 violates the federal structure of the Constitution. The court considered whether federalism is a basic feature of the Constitution. Whether the court can restore a dismissed state government if the proclamation under Article 356 is found unconstitutional. These issues were central to determining the limits of central power, the protection of state autonomy, and the role of the judiciary in safeguarding democracy. Judgment of the court. In S. Bommai v. Union of India, 1994, the Supreme Court of India delivered a historic and landmark judgment that placed strict limits on the use of Article 356 of the Constitution of India. The court held that the President's proclamation under Article 356 is subject to judicial review. The President's satisfaction is not absolute, and courts have the power to examine whether the proclamation was issued on relevant and valid grounds or was arbitrary and mala fide. The court further ruled that the proper place to test whether a state government has lost majority is the floor of the Legislative Assembly, and not the Governor's personal opinion. Dismissal of an elected government without a floor test is unconstitutional, except in very rare situations such as violence or breakdown of law and order. The Supreme Court also declared that federalism is a basic feature of the Constitution, and misuse of Article 356 destroys the federal balance. Therefore, Article 356 must be used only as a last resort and not for political purposes. Importantly, the court held that if a proclamation under Article 356 is found unconstitutional, the court has the power to restore the dismissed state government and legislative assembly. Thus, the judgment strongly protected democracy, federalism, and the rule of law, and ensured that President's rule is imposed only in genuine cases of constitutional failure. Important principles laid down. Judicial review of Article 356. The President's proclamation imposing President's rule is not final and is subject to judicial review. Courts can examine whether it was issued on valid grounds. Floor test is mandatory. Loss of majority must be proved on the floor of the Legislative Assembly. The governor's personal opinion is not sufficient, except in rare situations. Governor's report is not absolute. The governor's report can be questioned and examined by courts. It cannot be treated as conclusive evidence. Federalism is a basic feature. Federalism forms part of the basic structure of the Constitution. Arbitrary use of Article 356 violates this principle. Article 356 as a last resort, President's rule should be imposed only when no other option is available, and not for political reasons. Restoration of dismissed government. If the proclamation is found unconstitutional, courts can restore the dismissed state government and assembly. These principles greatly restricted the misuse of President's rule and strengthened democracy, federalism, and constitutional governance in India. Significance of the judgment. The judgment in S. Bommai v. Union of India is of great constitutional importance. It played a crucial role in protecting democracy, federalism, and the rule of law in India. Before this judgment, Article 356 was often misused by the central government to dismiss elected state governments for political reasons. One of the most important contributions of this judgment is that it checked the misuse of President's rule. By making the President's proclamation subject to judicial review, the Supreme Court ensured that Article 356 cannot be used arbitrarily. This strengthened the role of the Supreme Court of India as the guardian of the Constitution. The judgment also strengthened federalism by declaring it a basic feature of the Constitution of India. It protected the autonomy of states and prevented unnecessary interference by the centre in state matters. Elected state governments were given greater security and stability. Another significant aspect is the emphasis on the floor test. This ensured that the will of the elected representatives is respected and that governments are not dismissed on the basis of the governor's subjective opinion. Overall, the S. Bommai judgment restored public confidence in constitutional governance, ensured responsible use of emergency powers, and laid down clear guidelines for the future use of Article 356. It remains a cornerstone judgment in Indian constitutional law. Conclusion. It is a landmark judgment that greatly strengthened Indian federalism, democracy, and the rule of law. The Supreme Court made it clear that Article 356 cannot be used arbitrarily and that the President's proclamation is subject to judicial review. By insisting on a floor test to prove loss of majority, the court ensured respect for the will of elected representatives. The judgment firmly established that federalism is a basic feature of the Constitution of India and that misuse of President's rule violates constitutional principles. It also empowered courts to restore dismissed state governments if the proclamation is unconstitutional. Overall, the Bommai case placed constitutional limits on central power, protected state autonomy, and ensured that emergency powers are used only as a last resort. It remains a guiding precedent for the proper and responsible use of Article 356 in India.